Hello and welcome to Code Review, a new series, a hopefully monthly series in which I review some of the code that I've written in the past month. Or maybe from earlier, who knows. But yeah, what I want to explore in this series is code that I've been working on, not the professional code I've been working on because I'm under non-disclosure agreements not to reveal any of that, but I can show you some of the open source projects that I'm beginning to work on. That's the general idea. So if we cd, that's change directory, into my dev/Tom Bruce folder, you'll get a list of my personal projects here. Actually, I could have just said ls. I don't need to put ls-a. ls-a will reveal all of the files, including all of the files and folders, including hidden files and folders in the directory, which in this case is showing a dot, that's actually the current directory, and a dot dot, that's actually directory above. So if we cd dot dot, we actually move back up to the dev folder, and I would have to move back into Tom Bruce to once again show you these. Dot is, of course, current directory, so if we cd just dot, move to current directory, we haven't actually moved at all. But there you go. That's so those are sort of hidden sort of pseudo folders there. Right, yes. So here's a list of the things that that we've got that we might want to look at. Marmalade is a big one that I want to start. Actually, Otter as well. Otter and Marmalade, I've done nothing on these yet. I was hoping to do a little bit more before doing this episode, but you know, December, Christmas, New Year, seeing family, all that. A lot got in the way of that, so there's no development yet, and you know, my schedule is kind of packed, so we'll see. Hopefully this comes back next month, and I will have done something on Marmalade. That's where I want to be focusing. But for this month, we're going to look at FizzBuzz and Python Roguelike. Yeah, we're going to look at those two. Which one are we going to go for first? Let's go for Python Roguelike, because I do a lot of gaming on the channel, so if I jump over to Python Roguelike, I am actually really interested in developing a video game myself. Not obviously something really complex like, well, okay, let's take a look at what we've got along the top here. I don't want to create anything like Cities Skylines. That's a massive task, or Kerbal Space Program. These require huge teams of individuals. Faster Than Light, something like that's pretty simple, and I'm certainly going to take inspiration from Faster Than Light, I think. Actually, this is Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley has a single developer as well, doesn't it? But it's also got a single artist. I believe the developer does all the art as well, and it's beautiful. I could never do anything quite as beautiful as that. All of the art and animation. I'm going to try to avoid animation, which is why I'm focusing on games more like Dwarf Fortress and Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Yeah, we don't need to go through all of those. But yeah, taking inspiration from, say, Cataclysm, which is a roguelike RPG, and Dwarf Fortress, which is a roguelike colony management simulator. These get around the need for graphics and animation even for years, for what, 20 years? Dwarf Fortress has had no graphics, it's just had ASCII. So if we run this, Python main.py, there we go, it opens up another little window here. And I don't know if you can see that, if we go full screen, is it a bit bigger? Yeah, there's a little @ symbol in the middle there. And I can actually move this around using the arrow keys. So that's my little character. Obviously I've not got very far yet. In fact, I think it goes off the screen. It does, yeah. But it comes back. There we go. Yeah, so we've got a little character, no world yet, just an @ symbol in the void here. But that's the beginning of, say, a roguelike video game. We'll take a look at the code for that as well. Just type in code, followed by full stop, meaning, again, current directory. Open up the current directory in my coding tool. Okay, yeah, so I'm following a tutorial here. This might be a bit much for me to go over, actually. What I'm thinking at the moment of doing is abandoning it in Python and maybe writing it initially in JavaScript, which I'm more familiar with, which is not as powerful or as fast as Python. I wouldn't think, but I do know it a lot better, so I would be a bit more familiar. I've never really written Python until this tutorial, so. Yeah, okay, so main, we're importing Tcode. This means we're importing a library that's listed in requirements.txt here. We've got Tcode and NumPy. No idea what NumPy is. I think it's a dependency of Tcode. So Tcode requires NumPy. But Tcode is it's a roguelike toolkit, essentially. You can see here I'm using a tcod tileset load tile sheet, and we load in, where's the tile sheet? There it is. This tile sheet, if we zoom in, if we zoom back out a little bit, yeah, you can see on here, there's the we've got the alphabet as well, and you've got what I think ultimately become the walls of the dungeon you'd be creating in this tutorial. If you want to do a roguelike tutorial, by the way, there's a great great community at reddit.com/r/roguelike dev, and they have a bunch of tutorials, and they have like an event every year. They have I think it runs for 1 week, and they do a roguelike development event for newbies and for veterans alike. They do all sorts of stuff. But yeah, so you can see here we set a couple of these are probably variables, right? These could be changed. They're not assigned as constants, but is there such a thing as a const in Python? Probably not. So screen width 80, screen height 50. We could change these, and that would change something about what we see. So if we go to, let's say 40. So you know what you've just seen. And if we then say Python main.py again, there we go. We get a much narrower window, which, I can apparently also resize. Wasn't trying to resize, was trying to move it around. Oh, and in fact, look at that. When we go full size, we wind up stretching the @ symbol out when we resize the window, because it's being rendered for the 40 by 50. I've actually forgotten what that was, so we'll just Control Z and that will revert. Okay. Then you've got player X and player Y. These are your starting positions. We're saying screen width divided by 2. That gives us half the screen width, and therefore places the @ symbol in the middle. So 40 along. Same with screen height. 25 down. Oh, is it 25 down, or is it say? Let's try for screen height here, because I don't know if it's rendering from the top or the bottom, but I'm not seeing it. There it is. It's from the bottom. No, it's rendering from the top. That's totally fine. Whatever. I'm not going to go over all of this because I'm not, as I say, not really super familiar with Python. This is fairly new to me. With no idea really. With this as context, so I think we're defining like this as an object and then calling that the context, and then we manipulate the context being this thing right here. So we can say context.present root console, but of course, yeah, we'll leave that behind. I'm going to go for what is a sort of, hang on, are we still? I've modified main.py. How have I modified main.py? Good tool is Visual Studio Code, because we can actually jump across to source control here and see what's changed. Oh yeah, okay. I deleted that and I forgot to put it back in, so there we go. Everything's back to normal now. We'll close that. Okay. Brilliant, yeah. So let's CD back out and we'll take a look at FizzBuzz instead. FizzBuzz is your standard sort of interview question. In fact, we'll clear that. There we go. So FizzBuzz is your standard sort of coding interview question. It's actually a really annoying question that comes up in several of the interviews I've had in the past. And it's annoying because I always forget what the rules of FizzBuzz are. They say, okay, so talk us through FizzBuzz. And I go, yeah, I can do that. Can you remind me what FizzBuzz is all about? I do remember now having specifically written this package, which I can actually run from the command line here. The rules of FizzBuzz are simple. You print out a series of integers, and for any that is divisible by 3, you say fizz. For any that is divisible by 5, you say buzz. And of course, if they're divisible by both 3 and 5, say 15, you say FizzBuzz. I actually want to open up something like this. Hang on, GitHub / yeah, there it is. Tom Bruce /FizzBuzz, and walk you through step by step some of the developments that I did for this. Because what I thought would be a good idea for this was to go through, and you can see these are detailed as FizzBuzz, and then the changes that I made per step. The reason for that is the idea behind the interview question is to get a sense for how you go about programming. So they don't want you to provide a rote explanation of how to do FizzBuzz. Oh, I would just do this. Say if it was written in Python, actually, I know that there's a Python library that makes some of this stuff here a bit more quick and efficient. They don't want to hear, oh, I'd use this library that does it. You know, you wouldn't, for example, say, oh, I'd write it in JavaScript and use Tom Bruce's FizzBuzz library, because this actually can be imported into a JavaScript project, which is exactly what happens here. At CLI.js, I say const FizzBuzz equals require index, so I am requiring this file, and this is where FizzBuzz happens. You can actually install this in your own project and just use it straight away to do, you know, things like this FizzBuzz. Or indeed, you can change the rules a bit, say from 3 to 15. So instead we start at 3 and go up to 15 instead of doing the full 1 to 100 that we do by default. But let's go through step by step, because it's like I said, it's an annoying question, but it is an interesting process. So I was going through this and I was saying, okay, this is what I would do if I was told to develop FizzBuzz. This is what I would do step by step. I would start like this. And this, if I can zoom in, that'd be great. Yep. So I would say initially, for the series of integers from 1 to 100, so you can see here, I equals 1, and I is still less than or equal to 100. So for the integers 1 to 100, iterate through this loop and add 1 to I. So how this is going to start, if you're unfamiliar with programming, and if you're unfamiliar with JavaScript, because this is JavaScript, it's going to set a variable I at 1, and then it's going to do this. And then once it's done that, it's going to add 1 to I and check that it still meets this condition here, I is less than or equal to 100. Well, it does, it's 2, because we've only added 1 to 1. And then since it is less than or equal to 100, we do this again. And we do that over and over until we've done all 100 iterations. So 1 to 100, we're going to say if it does this, else if it does this, else if it does this, console.log the result to the terminal. So this actually does the exact same thing as you know, as this does. This does that. 1 to 100 FizzBuzz. Super easy, but it's a really really basic, really rudimentary, not very expandable approach. We say here, okay, so if I modulo 15 equals 0, that means if I is divisible by 15, then console.log FizzBuzz. Else, if it is divisible by 3, console.log fizz. Else, if it is divisible by 5, console.log buzz. And else, that is, if it is not divisible by any of these, we simply print out the number. And that does it. That completes the task. That's FizzBuzz. But this isn't good code, because we can't change these numbers. We can't expand these numbers if we want to do differently. Of course, we could edit the code directly, but it's not a very reusable piece of code. So we move on to my next commit, which is what? Executable CLI command. This is probably not that interesting. Ah, yes. Okay, so we added a shebang at the top saying this is JavaScript code and you have to run it in the node environment. And yeah, okay, so nothing else apart from that in the main index.js file. That just made it so that it's possible to run it. Well, to run it like, to run it how? Say if I was to ask you to run CLI.js like this, would you do that? No, you would throw an error. Okay, that's totally fine. Module not found. Oh dear. That's okay. But yeah, essentially that lets you run it from the command line. In this case, it looks like I don't have a library installed in the environment to do that, so that's not going to happen. But it essentially means you can run the file from the command line, and it'll output whatever the result of the JavaScript is by interpreting it through Node. Super easy. That's fine. We'll get rid of that. So remember how we started with this, the for loop with a really basic if, else statement. We're changing that here. In the next step, generalize with string concatenation. So instead of doing that, I'm here instead saying, okay, you can see, by the way, in GitHub or in Git, or I think, yeah, well, if we had made changes, we could go to source control, say, let's change that to 500 for no particular reason. Go to source control here, open up index. We can see it side by side that I've made that change. So GitHub and Git is a great utility. It lets you iterate and make changes progressively and, you know, see the entire history of a project. And so that's what we're doing here. So instead of what? Instead of if else, I've said let phrase equal a blank string. And then if it's divisible by 3, add fizz to the phrase. So phrase, this variable, gets modified here. We say plus equals, meaning reassign it with this attached to the value, fizz. And so now if it's divisible by 3, the phrase becomes fizz. Then, if it's divisible by 5, also add buzz to the phrase. So if it was, say, 5, it would still be blank after this step because it's not divisible by 3, and we would just have the phrase buzz. If it was 15, it would be fizz, and we would be adding buzz to it, so it would become fizz buzz. And so you can see how this is a little bit more adaptable. And if phrase at this point, at the final step, still equals blank, then add the actual I value, that's the integer from 1 to 100, to the phrase instead and print out the integer. So why is this better? Well, for one, it's not repeating console.log, so this code doesn't get repeated over and over. We instead just console.log it one time at the very bottom. And it becomes more expandable, I think, in the next step, and you'll see why as we move along. So set defaults as constants, generalize for any amount of terms. That's what we're doing next. So it looks like, whoops, I did not mean to bring that up. Yeah, we're changing 2 parts here, and we're adding a bunch more code, but that's fine. So we're changing the line for I equals 1, I is less than or equal to 100, I plus plus, to this, and it's further down here. For I equals from, I is less than or equal to 2, I plus plus. From and to, in this case, are constants. You can see them set here, 1 and 100. That makes them easier to modify in the next step. We've essentially taken them out of this function, this for loop, and said, we're going to put them somewhere where they're easier to get to, where we can change them if we want to. And so we put them as constants at the top of the file. That's what we've done with terms as well. Terms in this case being 3 fizz and 5 buzz, which means we have to change a little bit more down here. So instead of using if this and if this, we now have a for loop for constant factor in terms. So terms is this object here, this constant, and they are 3 fizz and 5 buzz terms. So for factor in terms, each of these therefore is a factor. We've got 3 and we've got 5. Those are our factors in terms, and we say set a constant called factor from terms, and for each we're going to do that. So then we say if I, that's this value here that we're iterating over 1 to 100 by default, if I is divisible by the factor, so 3 or 5, and we've reduced these 2 statements to this one line of code here, with the addition of a bunch more code, obviously. But this makes it more malleable and changeable in the future. So if I is divisible by factor, then we add to the phrase, we add terms, and then open square bracket factor, close square bracket. This means search in terms for whatever is at this index, the index of the factor. So the factor being 3 or 5 means, okay, in terms at the index of, 3, we have fizz. So this gives us fizz and adds that to the phrase. Super fine. So we do that for each factor in the list of terms. And therefore at 3, we end up with fizz. At 5, we end up with buzz. And 15, we iterate it over it twice and we get fizz buzz. Then if the phrase is still blank, we add the actual integer to the phrase instead, and then console.log the phrase. This is the same as over here. So where did we go from here? A bit more actually. Configure constants with command line arguments. Okay, so yeah, okay. So at this point, I've added in a package, yargs, which if we go over here, oops, back over to our package.json, dependencies, yargs. We've added a dependency on another library. See, FizzBuzz here is a library. It's Tombrews FizzBuzz. You can actually install it yourself. If you were to say go to github.com/Tombrews/FizzBuzz, there's instructions for how to install this here. Global installation like this, and that would give you the FizzBuzz command. Project installation, npm install this, and then import it like this. And we do exactly that over in this CLI file. We import it like that, and we use it right here. Yeah, so I've brought in yargs to enable some of that command line interface utilities. In particular, I'm talking about adding arguments to FizzBuzz. So if I say FizzBuzz, and then we've got from and to, 3 and 15, I can change that to say, yeah, I can add to the terms 13 equals foo. And in that case, what have we got? We should have 1, 2 fizz, 4 buzz, fizz, 7, 8 fizz, buzz, 11 fizz, foo at 13, because we've done this. We've added an extra term to the terms. Where's the actual code? There it is. So yeah, now we're adding this in at the top. Let me just zoom in again. We're adding in at the top of the file const yargs require yargs. So we're requiring that library and also bringing in hide bin from the helpers. And then we are getting the argument terms from that library, and that library is handling all of the complicated logic behind that for us. Then we're saying constant terms. We've still got const terms. That hasn't really changed. It's just that this time, instead of saying it equals this object, we're saying it equals the terms argument yielded to us from this here. And if that's blank, if that isn't there, then we say or the object as it was previously written. So it's a case of you can provide that argument or not. And if you don't, then, well, we know what to do anyway. We have a default set here. Same exact sort of thing for our constant from and constant to. These are checking, is it or is it not a number, right? NaN is not a number. So is not a number the from argument. So if it's not a number, then we say, okay, we're going to use the number 1. Whereas if it is a number and you've provided a number to the argument from and to, which is the ones I'm messing with here, isn't it? Nope, it's not. So if I type in FizzBuzz and then from 3 to 15, you can get that. These are also in a later step, they're parse inted, but I don't think we have that here because it's not that interesting. No, we don't. So you can change the from and to there, and essentially if you haven't provided a number, then it's going to say, okay, we're going to use our default. Whereas if you have provided a number, it's going to use your given number instead. And at this point, it's fully configurable and usable from the command line, and you can get FizzBuzz for any range of values that you really want. So if I were to say should we do from 1 to 1,000 rather than the default 100? And that spits us out FizzBuzz all the way up to 1,000. You can see at the end here, 997, 998, FizzBuzz. Yeah, but it's doing the same thing. It's iterating over each integer one by one and saying, is this fizz or not? Is this buzz or not? Is this FizzBuzz? Yeah, but it's customizable at this point. So finally, the last step I've got open up here, FizzBuzz, separate call logic for use beyond the command line. Okay. Oh yeah, because this isn't that interesting. This just has me creating the new file, cli.js here. And we've still got index.js, but it's changed a bit. We've gotten rid of this bit at the top. All of this that is us importing yargs and getting the arguments from yargs. And instead that's now up here in the new CLI file, which is what we're now using to execute it from the command line. So instead we just go back to having const default terms equals, the default terms at the top, const default from equals 1, const default to equals 100. And then this should be pretty much the same from that point onwards. Module.exports equals function, terms equals default terms, from equals default from, to equals default to. Yeah, so we're saying we want to export this function, which enables it to be used in another file, say cli.js, where we import it like so, const fizzbuzz equals require. And then from there we say let values equal this blank array. We'll come back to that in a second. But from here, from this for, it's the same. It's still for I equals from, I is less than or equal to 2, I plus plus. Let phrase, we've been over that. For constant factor in terms, we've been over that. If it is divisible by the factor, then add the phrase from the terms object to the phrase. And if it's blank, of course, add the integer. And then push into values at this point. So instead of simply outputting it to the gosh, where would we go for that? Instead of simply outputting it to the console, we are now pushing it into values to be returned to whatever piece of code is asking for it, and we return the list of values in that array. That's why we say let values. This isn't it's a variable we set at the top. Values equals this empty array. So for each time we go through the fizzbuzz operation, it gets added into that list, and that's what this is doing. Values.push phrase, and then we return that to say this file here, for example, the CLI file. So we say constant array equals fizzbuzz terms from to. We provide it the terms, the from, and the to, our own custom arguments, for example. And then with that array, we say for each, output to the console, same as we always have done. And this whole step here is just about making it reusable in other contexts. But that's it, that's the entirety of fizzbuzz. Let's go over to the code. So yeah, that's exactly as this file is, we've just looked at. Take a look at this one. Yeah, same here, return values, that's exactly where it all left off. As I said, I added parse int here at 1.2, so if you do provide a string instead of an integer, it can still interpret that as an integer because it parses it like so. Which just means essentially take whatever the value for from is and interpret it as an integer. And we don't need to import a library to do that or anything. That's just part of standard JavaScript. So that's fizzbuzz. One of those awkward interview questions I always forget about, but that's how I would go about it. And yeah, because that's what it's all about. That's what the interview question is always really all about. It's about saying, okay, so how do you start addressing this problem, and then how do you rework it to make it more useful or more reusable. Say, for example, if you also wanted to say, is it terms? Yes, terms. If you also wanted to say foo for 13, or if you wanted it to not output fizz and buzz at all, but you say, let's go for example, Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson, we could do that instead. So yeah, 1, 2, Homer, 4, Simpson, Homer, 7, 8, Homer, Simpson, 11, Homer, foo, 14, Homer, Simpson. So a nice little utility, not actually that useful, but the sort of thing that comes up in interviews all of the time. So what else have we got? What are we going to look at next month? I'm thinking next month we look at Marmalade. Hopefully I've done a bit more. Did I show you the state of Marmalade, by the way? I don't believe I did I? The state of Marmalade right now is just the default Rails project. I'm using the Ruby on Rails. It's going to be 3000. The Ruby on Rails framework to develop it, and this is just the default page that links to the actual documentation and stuff for Ruby on Rails. Good framework, and if you're new to programming or if you want to get into programming, I advise looking into well, for Ruby in particular, I would say, or for Rails in particular, I would say the Rails Hartle tutorial. Yeah, railstutorial.org by Michael Hartle. This is what taught me to program in Ruby on Rails in particular, so for web development. And it's a great book, a great resource for learning this. But the point I really wanted to stress was like you're going to use packages, you're going to use frameworks, and you really should a lot of the time because they're there to help. You just want to make sure that they are licensed appropriately for your needs. So yeah. Have I explained what Marmalade is? I don't believe I have. Maybe we leave that as a surprise and we'll come back at it next month and talk about the progress we've made. Yeah, so I hope this was interesting. Gosh, I know it wasn't. I know it really wasn't. But I just wanted a new series to explore my progress in coding as the year goes on. An excuse to do more open source stuff, really. So yeah, let me know if you enjoyed and if you'd like to see more of this. Thank you so much, and ta-ra. This is really cool, by the way. This that I showed at the start, it also has a emoji version. Really cool. Okay, ta-ra.